All right, well, our guest speaker, one of our most well-attended programs last season was Dave Shipley's presentation of his auto tour of the historic sites of Thurston County. And there was so much good material, and time constraints allowed him only to cover the western half of the county. And so we promised to bring him back, and today we fulfill that promise with part 2 of the eastern half of the county. And for those who might not know Dave, he's a retired school teacher for the Olympia School District. I think it'd be a treat to have been a student in his classes. I would have been the class clown, of course, Dave, if you want. But anyway, he...
in the office.
Principal's office, that's right. That's right. But he has a passion for history, and I'm sure that must have come out during your classroom time sometimes. But anyway, he has been quite active in that arena of history for a long time in Thurston County, Olympia, for Tumwater, and special projects of various kinds. He's led tours of the state capitol building on a pretty regular basis there, and downtown Olympia has done that, helped us with our summer Riverwalk tours, and so we're just excited to have Dave back for part 2 of his auto tour of Thurston County. So let's have a big warm welcome for Dave Shipley.
It's always good to be back and talk about Thurston County. I was on the Olympia Heritage Commission for a handful of years, chair of that one, chair of the Thurston County one for 28 years, and currently chair of the Tumwater Historic Preservation Commission, and it's a job that pays absolutely nothing, but I gain a great deal from it. I'd like to get started. Basically, this is a proposed automobile tour of Thurston County. I decided to call this northern and eastern sections. My maps up here are northern and southern because it's more or less the same thing. My goals for this presentation are to perhaps enlighten you about historic sites in the eastern and northern sections of Thurston County, and to encourage you to drive the country roads to enjoy the beauty and history of the county. I preface my presentation by saying I do not consider myself a historian, but rather as a person that simply is interested in history. If you have viewed my presentation on part 1 on the western and southern sections of the county, I'm going to have you bear with me because I'm going to repeat at the very beginning and the end that presentation. And hopefully you won't mind allowing me to show the other people who are new this time around to see those as well. The county was named after Samuel R. Thurston from Maine. He arrived in Oregon a year after the Oregon Treaty of 1846, and he witnessed the creation of Oregon Territory in 1848. He worked tirelessly for the settlers of Oregon, including the Donation Land Claim Law of 1850, post offices and mail routes, lighthouses, and pensions for War of 1812 veterans, of whom many were living in Oregon Territory, Oregon country at the time. Thurston contracted a fever while returning home in 1851 and died at sea at the age of only 35. He was buried in Alpacuco and was later reburied in Salem, Oregon. The Thurston County Historic Commission has placed a marker on his grave about his namesake county that's located in this state. I would now like to go over a few selected facts about Thurston County. Michael T. Simmons, an early settler of Tumwater, was a proposed name for the new county in early 1852, but he insisted that it should be named Thurston to memorialize Samuel Thurston. The county was formerly quite large. It stretched from the Willapa Bay to the Canadian border, and from the Cascade Mountains to the crest of the Pacific Ocean. Thurston County was created in 1852. It's the 4th oldest in our state, with each of these early counties created by the Oregon Territorial Legislature, as well as a few later counties. Washington Territory was created in 1853. Thurston County's current borders were finalized, as it says on the slide, in 1877. The county is now 32nd in size, but ranks number 6 in population out of 39 counties. Olympia has always been the county seat, and it's always been the capital of Washington Territory and the state. And perhaps surprising to some, the highest point in the county is Muth Peak, not Capitol Peak. In fact, Capitol Peak, you'll see in a second, is not even close. But it's named after a leader of the Nisqually tribe, and who happened to have a brother named Leschi. The name was proposed by the County Historic Commission. The forested hill with an elevation of 2,922 feet is located in the southeast corner of the county near Alder Lake and the town of Elby. Big Larch Mountain in the Black Hills and State Capitol Forest is 2,659 feet, more or less 300 feet less. Capitol Peak is actually 2 feet lower than that. This sign is relatively difficult to read along Capitol Lake and Heritage Park unless you are willing to kneel or lie down on a gravel pathway. All 39 counties in our state have markers displayed in alphabetical order. This sign points out such things as the name of the county seat, the year of creation, the local Native American tribes, the Mima Mounds, the Oregon Trail, and 2 colleges. The Thurston County Historic Commission has created several markers around the area from which this presentation was obtained. This marker is actually located in Grays Harbor County. It discusses the logging industry in the Black Hills. While this marker is located at both Interstate 5 rest stops located in Thurston County, and it covers the general history of the county. The Maytown rest stop has also this display that depicts places such as Grand Mound, Rochester, Gate, Tenino, Little Rock, and Bucota. Travelers going north on Interstate 5 will find this second marker at Scatter Creek rest stop, which briefly discusses the cities of Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. And I encourage you to stop at these signs and read them for yourself. My presentation will now follow a proposed automobile route through Thurston County, and we're going to start at Miller-Sylvania State Park. The land for this state park was donated to the state in 1921 as a family memorial and named after Frederick Miller and his sisters, Sophia and Christina. Camp Miller-Sylvania, which means Miller's Woods, was home to several Civilian Conservation Corps enrollees who developed the park with trails and buildings in the 1930s. The main portion of the South Union Grange was formerly a school, while earlier in history there was a Hudson's Bay Company store located across the road. South Union actually had a post office from 1892 until 1895. We'll now travel north to a Bush Kiosk as well as an Oregon Trail marker. The county has installed what I consider a very special kiosk, both in style as well as in substance. It honors the George Bush family. The kiosk reflects the architecture of the Bush home and was designed by a former member of the County Historic Commission. George Bush, a man of mixed race, settled in Tumwater in 1845 with his wife Isabella and sons as part of the first permanent American settlement on Puget Sound, initially named Newmarket. His son, William Owen Bush, on the left, became a very well-known farmer on his own right. Bush found out that the Oregon Provisional Government passed legislation in 1844 banning slavery as well as blacks, thus forcing him to settle near Puget Sound rather than Oregon's Rogue River Valley. The sign on the right summarizes George Bush. He was an expert farmer who faced discrimination because of his mixed race, both in Missouri and south of the Columbia River in the Oregon country, which at that time was jointly ruled by England and the United States. He was a highly respected person who helped friends as well as strangers with money and food and plantings. A correction, some historians now say that George Bush did not have a middle name of Washington, as the sign here shows. His son on the left, William Owen Bush, became worldwide recognition in agriculture. He earned medals in the production of grain at the international expositions, and as member of the state legislature, he sponsored legislation that indirectly led to the creation of Washington State College, now Washington State University in Pullman. On the left, you'll see a copy of the memorial sent to Congress by the Washington Territorial Legislature seeking a federal land grant for George Bush on the prairie, where the Olympia Airport is now located. An 1855 special act of Congress granted Bush 640 acres. The artwork of a noted painter, Jacob Lawrence, was utilized to illustrate the life of George Bush. George and his wife Isabella are buried in Tumwater in the cemetery, which is along Little Rock Road. The northern extension of the Oregon Trail is commemorated in several markers in our county, such as this one just south of the Bush Kiosk on Old Highway 99. You may also view such markers in Sylvester Park in Olympia, or near the 1915 Arch Bridge in Tumwater Historic District, as well as in Tenino. This northern extension of the Oregon Trail went from Cowlitz Landing near today's Toledo to Puget Sound. Heading south on Old Highway 99, you will notice this old roadhouse that was along the main thoroughfare from Canada to Mexico. This was originally State Route 1. It was constructed in 1922. In Tenino, you can view 2 Oregon Trail markers and see the impact of several rock quarries on the town's history. Tenino's 1913 City Hall, the former office for the Hercules Sandstone, which is located in the upper left corner, as well as the downtown historic district, including this old bank building, the 1906 State Bank of Tenino, is shown in the lower left corner, clearly shows Tenino sandstone construction of buildings before concrete became more common in usage in the 1920s and 1930s. The rock from Tenino's quarries is used in the Legislative Building and the east wing of the old Capitol Building in Olympia, as well as other locales such as Portland, Seattle, Ellensburg, Spokane, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. The sandstone was easy to work when it was first cut, but then it hardened when it was exposed to air. The word Tenino is Native American in origin and means junction. There was a split in early trails at this point. It does not refer to a train engine or a railroad car numbered 1090. The town was platted in 1873, but it grew slowly until quarries opened in 1888. In fact, by 1910, there were 5 stone quarries in Tenino. The face of one of the quarries creates a backdrop to a very unique 95-foot deep and cold public swimming pool, which is fed by natural spring water. The town came alive in 1872 when the Northern Pacific Railroad laid its tracks through the town. The 1914 railroad station was moved to a city park in 1976, and it made it into a museum that features several items, including wooden money that was used by the local people during the Great Depression of the 1930s. The city park not only includes the railroad station, but also the swimming pool, but also Tickner School and the 1900 Quarry House, in addition to trails and playgrounds. The house in the upper right was built in 1892 by Thomas Russell, the owner of the Tenino Stone Company, who formerly lived in Scotland and later in Canada. He carved stone that was used in the old Capitol Building, the Temple of Justice at Olympia, in addition to sites in Tacoma, Seattle, and elsewhere. The house is called Folk Victorian. It was rebuilt in 1911. The other 2 pictures are locations on Sussex Street in Tenino's historic district, including the 1910 Russell Building, which is pictured in the upper left. Ezra Meeker is a notable figure in Washington history. He was a well-known hop grower in Puyallup and was involved in the first trial of the Nisqually leader Leschi in the late 1850s. This faded sign quotes Meeker's philosophy on the need to learn history, and I pre-printed it for you so you can see it on the right-hand side. Meeker is especially known for commemorating the Oregon Trail. He came on the Oregon Trail by wagon in 1852, and then he retraced the trail by wagon from 1906 to 1908. He took a second wagon trip in 1910 to locate lost portions of the trail. In 1916, he retraced the old pioneer route by car to lobby Congress for a national highway along the route, which essentially became US 30 and later Interstate 84. He again retraced by airplane, a biplane, over the route in 1925. And if you think that's something, listen to this one. The marker in the lower right was dedicated by Meeker himself in 1906 in Tenino. It's the only one in our state. He started an organization called the Old Oregon Trail Association, which is now the Oregon-California Trails Association, with the goals of preserving and protecting immigrant trails. He died in 1928 at the age of 97, and he was planning yet another automobile trip over the historic Immigrant Trail at age 97. We will now take a side trip on Highway 507 to the town of Baccata and visit the sites of an early prison and a lumber mill. The Baccata area was purchased, I should say, was purchased the Webster Farm and named the community Seatco, a coastal Salish word which stands for ghost or evil. The Washington Territorial Penitentiary, then privately owned, was established in Seatco in 1878, and it closed 10 years later. Prisoners worked in the local coal mines and the farms, in prison workshops. Conditions in the prison, to say the least, were harsh. The walls were 12-inch planks laid flat, spiked at 5-inch intervals. The legislature later changed the name to Baccata for the first two syllables of the last names of three men, James Buckley, Samuel Coulter, and John B. David. The name Tono supposedly comes from a ton of coal. The mining operations produced coal for steam locomotives from 1907 until 1932. Modern strip mining has removed all that was left of Tono at the Centralia power plant. A large sawmill called Mutual Lumber Company was a major industry here. It began in 1902 and it produced 120,000 board feet per day for the first 10 years, but was destroyed by fire in 1913. The company moved to Tenino, but later returned to Baccata in 1949, employing 300 workers. In the 1920s, it was considered a town with $1 million payroll. The site became the Baccata planing mill, but all operations ceased in 1954. The plant was later destroyed by fire, which is true for almost all lumber mills. They seem to be all destroyed by fire. Yet another side trip will take you to a glacial erratic near Lake Lawrence. And I'm curious, how many people know what a glacial erratic is? Good for you. It's one that I find that not very many people know about. So here you go. You're going to learn something maybe. A glacial erratic, by definition, is a rock or a boulder that is different from the surrounding rock and is believed to have been transported from a distance by glacial action. This rock actually comes from the coastal mountains of British Columbia. Its approximate weight is 400 tons. It is 17 feet in height. It's about the same in length. Its location marks the maximum southern advance of the Puget Lobe of an Ice Age glacier around 17,000 years ago. They're all over, if you just take a look. We will now travel north of Tenino. McIntosh is a 1.5 mile long lake edged by several homes today. In the 1920s, the area was the site of a bustling mill, and it was called the A.P. Perry Lumber Company, and its shoreline pilings are still visible in the lake. There were numerous timber mills in the county by the early 1900s, as shown in the upper right. The Perry Company employed several Scandinavian as well as Japanese workers, as shown in the 1920 census in the lower right. Rail lines allowed timber harvest to migrate inland. McIntosh was a landowner when a rail line came through, hence the source of the name. This site had a mill first named Nisqually Mill Company and then Perry Mill. A fire, reconstruction, financial woes, new ownership, bankruptcy, and yet another fire marks the site of the history of this place. Following Military Road, one of the state's earliest roads that connected Vancouver on the Columbia River to Puget Sound, you will cross the Deschutes River. This 30-mile stream rises at the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Its name is French in origin and means waterfall or cataract. The flat open area north of the river here shows the effects of continental glacier outwash and was used by the Puget Sound Agricultural Company, a Hudson's Bay Company subsidiary, for grazing lands, and is still used for grazing lands today, as you can see. Fort Nisqually supervised these outlying farms that produce agricultural products for consumption and sale. The site of the fort was located in what is now the city of DuPont in Pierce County. Using Military Road, we will eventually arrive in the town of Rainier, once noted for lumber mills. The town was settled in 1890 by Albert and Maria Gerke. He and his brothers built the Zion Evangelical Lutheran Church, which started as a school in 1896. A county sign is produced by the County Historic Commission, is located in the lower left, is located near the City Hall in Rainier. The old Rainier School was built in 1913 after the Bob White Lumber Company began operations there in 1906. Actually, Rainier eventually had a total of 5 lumber mills. A series of fires in the 1920s and early 1930s destroyed the mills and local buildings. The Untitled Trail is one of the rails to trails in our county, as you can see from this map. We'll now enter the town of Yelm to visit more historic sites. On the southern edge of Yelm, you can visit Cochran Memorial Park, which commemorates the early irrigation projects in the Yelm Prairie. The park is a wetland rehabilitation project featuring reclaimed water. The construction and maintenance of the irrigation ditches was a major accomplishment and provided an early economic base for the area, with such products as berries and beans produced on the 5,000 acres of irrigated land. The name Yelm is from the Salish language, and it refers to heat waves or radiations sometimes seen when you looked across Yelm Prairie. The Hudson's Bay Company joined the native peoples on the prairie, and then later by settlers who started a town, especially with the arrival of the railroad in 1873. Yelm suffered major fires in 1908, 1913, and 1924. One significant historic building in Yelm is the Oddfellows Lodge that was constructed with volunteer labor around 1922. It's the only commercial building to survive the 1924 fire. Learning more about Yelm can be obtained by visiting the Yelm Museum. Let's try another side trip south of Yelm. We'll take you to Deschutes Falls County Park, opened in September of 2017. The park features trails, picnic tables, 3 viewpoints, and swimming in some very deep and cool pools. If you've ever been there, I don't know if you've been there yet. On the road to the falls is a rejuvenated old school. The name lacamas refers to camas, a root vegetable gathered by Native Americans. There's a hill named Bald with an elevation over 2,000 feet just east of Bald Hill Lake. The Bald Hills in the southeast corner of the county are part of the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The city of Centralia produces electricity from a hydro plant that's located north of Yelm. The city of Centralia built this power plant at a cost of $1 million in 1928 and 1929, utilizing the waters of the Nisqually River by way of a 9-mile canal. The original diversion dam was a timber crib. The plant now has 2 penstocks instead of just 1, and it produces hydroelectricity for Centralia. The Nisqually tribal name refers to people of the river. Nisqually is a coastal Salish group who were placed on a reservation through the Treaty of Medicine Creek in 1854 and Executive Order of 1857. Tribal and trust lands now total about 3 square miles. A portion of the Nisqually Reservation was actually lost when Fort Lewis was created, originally called Camp Lewis, was created in 1917. About 23,000 of the 94,000 acres of the military base is actually located in Thurston County. Today, of course, it's called Joint Base Lewis-McChord. A marker near the tribal center honors tribal members who have served in various military branches. This sign deals with the Indian Wars of 1855 and 1856, caused in part by those treaties and reservations. Leschi was a Nisqually leader during this time period, as well as his brother Muth. Without getting into details of the conflict involving settlers and the United States military with various Native American tribes on both sides of the Cascade Mountain in the 1850s, the marker commemorates Nisqually tribal members during this conflict. The marker centered at the bottom of this slide lists those who served with the Army, including Muth, who was actually murdered in Governor Isaac Stevens' office here in Olympia, and, get one more there, Leschi. Leschi was eventually captured and brought to trial for the killings of 2 territorial militiamen, but the jury was not able to reach a verdict, thus a hung jury. On this jury was Ezra Meeker, and he was one of the 2 jury members who voted for acquittal. A second trial was held, in which Leschi was convicted and sentenced to be executed in 1858. These photos involving the trial and execution of Leschi were taken in Lakewood in Pierce County. The Army refused to allow the execution to take place at Fort Steilacoom. So there's a rock that commemorates it, and there's a picture of where the fort's located. There's a few buildings still remaining, and the neighborhood is where the oak trees used to be located. That street is named Leschi Street. On his tombstone located in Tacoma, there was a variety of items on this particular day when I visited it. However, it is the back of the tombstone that has a poignant statement. Please notice the first two words, judicially murdered. The stone's engraving goes on to mention misunderstandings that came out of a treaty, a military conflict, and that he is considered a martyr. On December 10, 2004, Leschi was exonerated by unanimous vote by a historical court of inquiry following a trial in absentia. Venturing further along, we turn off Highway 510 and take Yelm Highway to visit a pair of markers. The school in the upper left is a 1910 Collins School, located a short distance from a pair of historical markers. One stone marker marks the site of Fort Eaton, a defensive site constructed by fearful settlers during the Indian Wars. It was built in 1856 and constructed of 16 log buildings connected by a high stockade in a square configuration. It was named for Nathan Eaton, who owned the land upon which it was built. 8 families stayed here during the entire duration of the conflict. The Willamette Meridian is a principal line for land surveying in our state. The initial point is near Portland. It was established by a Surveyor General of Oregon Territory in 1851. There's actually a rock down there that marks the exact spot where it starts. It runs due north from Portland, Oregon through Thurston County, hence the name for Meridian Road. The Willamette Meridian set off in order to bypass Puget Sound, and it then continues northward to the Canadian border. Taking Meridian Road back to 510 eventually brings us to the old Pacific Highway. Following Watershed Park on Henderson Boulevard as a major municipal source of water, Olympia obtained its principal water supply from Mcallister Springs. Today, the water is obtained with wells uphill above this site. The springs are named for James and Charlotte Mcallister, who arrived with the Michael T. Simmons and George Bush immigrant party of 1845. Medicine Creek percolates out of springs and was considered by Native Americans as a place where a person gets a form of spirit power, or as a medicine place. Mcallister is one of the very first casualties of the Indian War in the mid-1850s. Near this creek, from December 24 to December 26, 1854, a treaty council with the Nisqually, Squaxin, Puyallup tribes, among others, was held by Washington Territorial Governor Isaac Stevens. The treaty site was located on Medicine Creek, or Mcallister Creek, on the Nisqually River Delta. The treaty was greatly misunderstood since the negotiations were hasty and conducted largely using Chinook jargon, a limited trade language made up of words from various languages. A marker at Old Nisqually on Pacific Highway is about this treaty and uses the name Shinanum, which is a coastal Salish name for the lower portion of Medicine Creek, which is also called Mcallister Creek. This map shows where the marker is located, as well as the actual treaty site near Interstate 5 on the wildlife refuge. I'm going to digress a little here. I'm going to take you from Nisqually Valley to the grounds of the Thurston County Courthouse, because here you'll find another county historic sign. The sign is a location of a seedling from the actual treaty tree under which the Medicine Creek Treaty was negotiated. A federal law created the Medicine Creek Treaty National Memorial under the National Park Service. So, if you go to the county courthouse, you'll find a tree parked alongside the parking lot. Frank's Landing, consisting of about 6 acres, is a significant historic site. It was purchased by Willie Frank in 1917 as in lieu land, after a portion of the original Nisqually Reservation was transferred to Fort Lewis, now part of Joint Base Lewis-McChord. In the time of Indian activism during the 1960s, this was a location of confrontations between Native Americans and state officials over Indian fishing rights. This fishing rights controversy ultimately resulted in the Bolt Indian fishing decision of 1974, stating that Indians had the right to fish in their usual and accustomed places and to half of the fish caught. Fishing has long been a long-term tradition of Northwest tribes, as shown in this tombstone in Tacoma Cemetery. The use of local waterways by Native Americans is highlighted by the annual canoe journeys involving Washington and British Columbia tribes, such as the one in 2012 portrayed here in a paddle to Nisqually, as well as a paddle to Nisqually in 2016. This 2,800-acre wildlife preserve has 40,000 feet of Puget Sound shoreline and is named after Billy Frank Jr., Nisqually leader who was involved in environmental concerns and Indian fishing rights. He has received several honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The refuge features scenery, trails, visitor center, and a variety of wildlife. The Port of Tacoma once envisioned a large industrial development for the Nisqually Delta. Near the Twin Barns, a couple of signs discuss the Brown Farm, which featured dikes and produced a variety of farm products and actually has 4 artesian wells. Allison Brown bought the 1,500 acres in 1904 and built a 4-mile dike to keep out salt water and thus turned the marshland into a very large farming operation. Eventual financial difficulties proved insurmountable to Brown and subsequent owners who ended farming operations on the Delta. From the wildlife refuge, we're going to take Interstate 5 to Marvin Road and Tolmie State Park. William Tolmie was at Hudson's Bay Company's Fort Nisqually from 1853 to 1859, or 59, I should say, and was chief factor from 1855 to 1859. He was a graduate from the University of Glasgow School of Medicine. He was also a very accomplished naturalist as well. From there, using Hawks Prairie to Johnson Point Road, you will eventually make your way, as shown on this map, to reach Woodard Bay Natural Area. Woodard Bay was well known by Native Americans, especially for its salmon and shellfish. The inlets were named by Charles Wilkes while leading an 1841 U.S. exploring party. Woodard Bay is part of Henderson Inlet.
Hope it got up there.
Yeah. The Indian name for the area actually meant squeezing one's canoe. As this sign says at the top, the Capital City Oyster Company in 1902 purchased the tidelands and adjoining uplands along Chapman and Woodard Bays for raising oysters. Harvey Rice Woodard had a donation land claim here in 1853, and that's the source for the name of the bay. Many people thought that the terminus, the Transcontinental Railroad, was going to be at Olympia, and thus investors and speculators bought land in anticipation of monetary profits to be made. However, the line ended up in Tacoma, and people like Philo Remington, a New York gun manufacturer pictured here, lost some money. Woodard Bay was a booming facility for the Weyerhaeuser Company from 1928 to 1987, when 1 million board feet of timber went through it daily. 1 million board feet daily. The logging trains from Vail, and the logging trains came from Vail, and the logs were dumped into the bay, and then they were transported through Puget Sound, mostly to Everett. Today, the area is owned by the State Department of Natural Resources and is a nationally recognized historic landscape and conservation area, a place to enjoy trails through the outdoors if you have not been there before. The former logging railroad is now the Chehalis Western Trail that goes from Woodard Bay to Tenino Yelm Trail. Following Woodard Bay Road and Boston Harbor Road, we will arrive at additional historic sites in northern Thurston County. Boston Harbor has an interesting history. Duffel Point was prehistorically known as house pits for the location of dwellings there by the Salish Indians. It was later named Brown's Point for James B. Brown, a carpenter's mate with the 1841 Charles Wilkes expedition, which is also known as the U.S. Exploring Expedition. Isaac and Susan Allen Duffelmeyer located the point in 1851 or 1852 with a donation land claim. Many promoters had plans for the area. P.P. Carroll planned to create a city named Harriman City for the president of the Southern Pacific Railroad, who supposedly promised a rail line. C.C. Hillman, a Seattle developer, in 1907 promoted the site as Boston Harbor. The light for navigation was established in 1887 as a light suspended from a pole. And the current light was built in the 1930s with modifications since then. Boating is a major draw here, and it includes a state boat launch site. And if you follow further south, the county has a park south of Boston Harbor named for the Burfoot family who once owned the land here. The park features 1,000-foot water shoreline, a creek, a playground, forest uplands, and trails. In addition to places in the county to brag about, there are also some interesting places in the three major incorporated cities in Thurston County. In the city of Lacey, formerly named Woodland, you can find the following sites, such as St. Martin's University, which began in 1895. The city of Olympia, once named Smithfield, has several historic locations, including the ones I've chosen to list here. The Bigelow House, built in the 1850s, is one of the oldest houses in our state. And of course, there's a crown jewel on the hill, the legislative building, which was completed in 1928. Meanwhile, Tumwater, originally named Newmarket, has these sites, including the Old Brew House, which was in the newspaper yesterday. Did you check that out? Got a newspaper, trying our hardest to hang on to the brewery. But it includes the brewery, and this picture shows the construction, the Tumwater before the construction of Interstate 5 and the creation of Capitol Lake. Meeker earlier had thoughts on the meaning of history, so here's my thoughts on meaning of history. I sincerely thank you for attending this presentation. I hope this will inspire you to go out there and drive the country roads, enjoy the beauty and the history of our county. It's been my pleasure to show you some of the county's historic sites. I also wish to thank the people who served on the Historic Commission and all the people that were staff people that worked with me in the commission. A big thank you to my wife, Chris, who went on so many tours of the county. She knows the roads by hand easily. So thank you for attending.
And I do hope you come back next Thursday. We've got an expanded schedule of these talks now, and so we're going to talk about maritime history of South Puget Sound with Les Eldridge and John Huff. And so we're going to have a dual presentation there with the same big screen. And so I hope you make it a point to come back again. And